guys, I'm Erin and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm talking about all the books that I read in the month of September. So, in September I read 14 books. Of those, I read 7 fantasy, 5 romance, 1 nonfiction, and 1 contemporary book. And my average rating for the month was a 3.86, which is not bad. So, I'm just going to go through these in the order that I read them in. The first book I read was The Worst Best Man by Sosa. This is an adult contemporary romance. I thought this was a really fun read. This is about a wedding planner whose fiance left her at the altar, essentially. Like, he ran away the day of the wedding after having like a drunken conversation with his brother, the best man, the night before that convinced him to leave. And now it's several years later, and our wedding planner has this potential job she's trying to compete for as like a in-house wedding planner at this big hotel. And to compete for the job, she is being teamed up with a marketing person, and that person happens to be the best man from her wedding several years prior. And in addition, she is competing against another planner to get this job, and that planner is partnered up with the best man's brother, her ex-fiance. So she and the best man get thrust together, and it was a really cute book. Like, it played a lot into a lot of tropes I liked. Just the enemies, kind of the enemies to lovers. There's kind of like, there's just the competition aspect of like trying to get this wedding planner job I enjoyed. And it had a lot of fun food and interesting kind of like cultural food that they talked about, because I believe the main character is Brazilian. And so if you're into like reading about food, this book might make you hungry. But yeah, it was a fun read and I gave it 4 stars. Next, I listened to the audiobook for The Woman They Could Not Silence by Kate Moore. This is a nonfiction and the second book I read by this author. Yes, this follows a woman named Elizabeth Packard who during the mid to late 1800s, she gets sent to an insane asylum by her husband for essentially having independent thought. Like, she's not crazy, she just, I guess, starts to think for herself and maybe just doesn't agree with him all the time, and for that she gets sent to this insane asylum by her husband. And unfortunately, this is really common in those days, that women who start to have independent thoughts or maybe disagreeing on some things get sent to insane asylums by their husbands, and it was legal and they got away with it. And so this follows specifically Elizabeth Packard, both as she tries to get herself out of this insane asylum, and then later as she becomes a pioneer in kind of the mental health world, as far as just helping change laws with women being sent by their husbands into these insane asylums, and just other kind of just general laws regarding this area. And I enjoyed this. Well, enjoy is a weird word because it was kind of a horrifying story. Similar to this author's other book, Radium Girls. It's like these both shine light on stories that I had not heard of that are kind of horrifying, but I still enjoyed the book and reading about these true stories. I did think the book probably could have been shorter. I think it falls a little victim to the issue I have with her previous book, where I liked the story she was telling and appreciated learning about it, but sometimes it felt like her writing style sensationalized it in a way that felt like it was fictional sometimes. Like, it definitely wasn't fictional, but it was written in a style that I would expect to see in a historical fiction book and not a nonfiction book. But overall, I did still enjoy and appreciate learning the story, and I gave this book 4 stars, and I would continue to pick up more nonfiction by this author should she publish more. Next book I read was Portrait of a Scotsman by Evie Dunmore. This is the 3rd book in the historical romance series, The League of Extraordinary Women. And this follows Hattie, who we've seen in the previous 2 books as one of the friends, and she just wants to be an artist and marry a nice gentleman. But she gets entangled with Lucian Blackstone, who is certainly not a nice gentleman. He is kind of this ruthless businessman who kind of has this air of mystery. People don't really know who he is. They know they know him by reputation, but he doesn't he's not an overt person and extroverted, and he's kind of behind the scenes kind of deal. And he sees her as a way to get the power that he doesn't have with his money, because his money is all self-made, not a noble title kind of thing, and he wants that power to be able to do more things. And so they end up in a compromising situation, in a classic historical romance trope of compromising situation, someone sees, so they must get married. And this is a trope that I generally enjoy in historical fiction. I've read as a setup. And so after they've married, they end up in Scotland, where Lucian has bought a coal mine, and he is there to kind of take stock of it and fix it, try to help it be successful so that he's not just sinking money into it. And I kind of had 2 thoughts about the whole coal mining situation, because that's a big chunk of the book. Because on one hand, a lot of the situations while they're in this town bring out side to their personality that like the other person hadn't seen, and a lot of those things, like these personality reveals, it's what has them kind of falling for each other, and I really liked those aspects, definitely. And she does start to go into the kind of commentary on coal mining ethics and kind of working laws around that, which I expected a little bit of that kind of thing from her, because I mean her first 2 books are very focused on women's on the suffragette movement, and I definitely enjoyed that. And this one, I think she just leaned a little too hard into the social issues. It's not that I disagreed with any of what she was saying, I just think she like took too much time going into the minutia of some of them in a way that for several chapters I felt like this book lost its identity as a romance book, and it kind of just felt like a historical fiction book. And it was like intriguing, but I was like, but I don't feel like I'm reading a romance anymore. And then it kind of pulled it back together and went back to feeling like a romance. So I just think I wish she had not quite leaned into the details of the coal mining ethics quite as much, and maybe mentioned it some, but just not as heavy, and kept it more feeling like a romance all the time. So for that reason, I did give it a 4 other than a 5, but I did still enjoy it, and I'm excited for the 4th book in the series coming out next year. Next, I read Anchored Hearts by Priscilla Oleveras. This is an adult contemporary romance, and this takes place in Key West, and it's a second chance romance where the main characters had a relationship, I think, 10 years prior when they were at the end of high school, and then our hero left the island. He left Key West after a falling out with his dad, and our heroine stayed on the island, and he was like mad at her for not coming with him, and she was mad at him for not staying. They broke up. They haven't spoken in 10 years, but now he's back. He worked as a travel writer or a travel photographer, and he got injured, and so he's recuperating back at home for several months, and they end up meeting again because their families are still really good friends. So we have the kind of meddling mothers pushing them together, and I thought this book was just like, it was fine. It was kind of cute, but the romance itself was lacking something. I liked the setting a lot, and I liked kind of the cultural aspect and the kind of the big families they had, and like some of the side characters' interactions and stuff like that, but the romance itself felt a little lacking. They absolutely, for sure, had physical chemistry, but I felt like the author failed to develop romantic chemistry, and it's like the entire romantic chemistry between them was, oh, they were in love 10 years ago, so it's just still there. But I didn't really feel it in like the present day between them past just physical, which was fine, but it made me not super into like them ending up together romantically, because I just felt like it was just missing that little something there. Next was a reread for me, which was The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater. I read this for the first time, I think, 8 years ago, and I reread it because I was intending to finish the series, because I never finished it when it was first published, and I liked it. I remember giving this a 5-star when I first read it in high school, but now I probably give it more of a 4-star. I really liked the way Maggie Stiefvater did this kind of this like contemporary magic fantasy setting of kind of like a small southern town with this mixing of like the ley lines and the Welsh lore and kind of blues family of like seers or the psychics. It was a very interesting contemporary setting that I haven't really read much, but to be partially also because I don't read a ton of just kind of like contemporary magic settings. So it's definitely something interesting. However, I think I liked it less now just because nowadays I'm not as into the kind of real world contemporary fantasy as I was when I first read this, but I did enjoy it. So next, another reread, which was Fire by Kristin Cashore. This is the second book in the Graceling Realm series. This I read for the first time, oh gosh, I think 10 years ago. I think it's been even longer for this one. And this is another one that I think I liked more the first time I read it. So when I reread Graceling in August, it was just as good. But this one I think I didn't like just as much. I gave this, again, a 5-star the first time I read it back in early high school, but I probably would only give it a 4-star now. And it's kind of hard for me to quantify why I didn't like it, because I also read it during a really slumpy week where I just like wasn't in a good reading headspace, and maybe I should have paused it and come back. Too late for that now, but I just think the plot just moved slowly for me. Like, it took me a while to read, and I liked the characters and I liked like what the plot was. It just like didn't grab me in a way that made it a fast reading plot, and for that I just like wasn't a 5-star reading experience for me. This second time around, I did very much like the enemies to lovers kind of romance dynamic we have between two characters. And I mean, I like seeing more of the Gracing world. I liked all of our characters. It was just, I don't know, it was just kind of a slower read in a way that it just wasn't a 5-star reading experience. Next, I read The Witch's Heart by Genevieve Gornichec. This is an adult fantasy standalone, and this is a reimagining of Norse mythology, focusing on Angerboda, who is a witch and who is one of Loki's wives. And so I actually originally thought that Angerboda was made up for this book, and that our author had kind of made up her own mythological character and inserted her into the myths. But after doing some Norse mythology Googling, I discovered, no, Angerboda is in fact a figure in Greek mythology, or Norse mythology. I'm just so used to saying Greek mythology. Norse mythology. However, from what I could tell, there is not a lot written in the Norse mythological, I guess, source documents about her, and so this was the author's imagining of what her life looked like, much more expanded than what you do hear about. You mostly hear about her kids more than her in the Norse mythological source writing. So this is definitely something I would recommend as like a read-alike to Circe by Madeline Miller, and it kind of had the same like hold up for me that Circe did, that kept both of those from being 5 stars and instead 4 stars, which is this is a very character focused story, and that's just not as much my jam. And you really spend essentially the whole book in one location. Like, Angerboda really doesn't leave her cave, like, ever. And so it's very much just she's sitting there and people arrive at her cave and then she does stuff with them and they leave and she just kind of waits till they come back. She does leave a little bit. It's not 100% of the book, but it's like most of the book where she's kind of sitting there. So I very much enjoyed the story. I really liked the characters. Like, I liked Loki's appearances. There's another character, Angerboda, falls in love with both Loki and another female character whose name I am currently blanking on, and I liked that. I was definitely interested in, like, it got me interested in, like, looking up a lot of these Norse characters that I just don't know much about, because I don't really know much about Norse mythology, and I think retellings, especially mythological retellings that inspire me to look up more of the source material, have succeeded in their goal, in my opinion. Maybe that's not the author's actual goal, but that's always like what I want from these, is to get to like show creatures or talk about tales in a way that intrigue me to want to know more. And so they definitely accomplished all of those things. Again, this is, I think, is a very solid retelling, especially if you loved Circe. You should definitely pick this. Next, I read Unkindness of Magicians by Kat Howard. This is an adult fantasy novel, and I believe I think there's like a planned sequel. So it's not a standalone, but definitely, I mean, you could read it as a standalone. I don't know if like that sequel was like forthcoming or just like a theoretical sequel. But anyway, so I'm treating it as a standalone because of that. So this is like in our world, what with magic kind of hidden from, you know, non-magical people. And it takes place in New York City, and every like so many years there's like a competition between magical houses to kind of determine who is going to be the head magical house for the next period of time. It's like every house hires a champion, or their heir is their champion. Like, houses do it different ways where they hire some, and then there's like fledgling houses, or like who are trying to become houses like on their own, and they're competing, and like if you make it so far you become a house, and if you win you become the rulers or whatever. And so this primarily follows a character named Sydney, who is kind of an outsider who doesn't belong to any of the houses, but she's a really powerful magician, and so she gets herself hired by a house to compete in this competition, and she has some kind of ulterior motives going on. This book reminded me somewhat of Alona Andrews' Hidden Legacy series, but without the romance, kind of with all the magical houses mixed in with like kind of our world kind of deal. A lot of just kind of the world of it reminded me of that, not the competition part, but like the world of it reminded me of that. And then also this reminded me of an adult version of The Warrior Heir by Cinda Williams-Chima. And in that case, it reminded me of that because of the kind of this house competition aspect. So kind of mixing those two series is kind of like similar titles. And this is definitely a plot-driven novel. It's very fast-paced, and the plot really hooked me in the second half. However, I think the one thing that really held this back for me is there's just too many point of views in this book. It's not super long. It's kind of just like an average 350-page book. And there's just so many point of views that I feel like a lot of the first half was me trying to figure out, okay, who are you? Who are you? How are you connected to this person? And because of that, I never felt connected to any of the characters at all. Because I just instead of spending time like kind of sinking into their personalities and their point of view. I was just sitting here trying to like sort it out. So the second half definitely picked up for me once I kind of had a handle on that, and the plot kind of picked up. I definitely think that was a failing of this book. It just had way too many point of views. And so also, if you're looking for like in-depth characters, this is definitely not a character-focused book. It is primarily a plot-driven book. So if you're looking for that, it's got that going for it. And so yeah, I ended up giving this book a 3.5 stars. Not a bad, but like not a super favorite either. Next, I read Lightning in the Blood by Brennan. This is the second book in her Revericai duology. And as with the first novella, these are both novellas. So the first novella follows this character who wakes up this like one day and doesn't have any memory of who she is, and she finds out she's kind of been summoned by this group of people who she's now bound to them to execute this quest they give her. And so this book takes place a couple years later after the first novella. And in this novella, she's still kind of trying to piece together her past. She's remembered some things, but she still has a lot of missing holes. And so that's kind of just what this novella is about, is just kind of her continued adventures and piecing together her memories. As with the first one, I kind of wish these were full length instead of novellas, but I'm just generally more of a fan of full length novels over novellas anyways. And so this is the last published book in this series and world, and I don't know if Marie Brennan plans to write more on it, but I'd definitely be interested in seeing more of this world, because I just feel like I haven't spent a ton of time with these characters, but I feel like they have a lot of potential, and I just like want to spend more time. But I'm not sure if she'll ever return, but so. But yeah, both of these novellas were 4 stars for me, and they're fun little reads, and there's not much you can say because, again, since the character doesn't know anything about who she is, that's kind of part of the series, is kind of following along and discovering with her. Next, I read The X-Talk by Rachel Lynn Solomon. This is an adult contemporary romance, and I adored this book. I gave it 5 stars, my first 5-star read of the month, and not my only one, but my first one. And I just love this book. It was about these 2 characters who work at public radio in Seattle, and they don't get along at the radio station, but they end up having to work together on this new show/podcast that they're trying to do, like trying to do something different to like keep listeners up at their radio. And so this show is called The X-Talk, and it's 2 exes talking about relationships, like kind of how their relationship failed, but also just general relationship advice. So these 2 characters end up playing exes. So they're not actually exes, but they're like banter between each other in the office because they don't like each other sound like it could be exes, and so they're all like, it should be easy for you to play exes. You interact like you were exes, like who had a bad breakup. So this book just worked for me really well. The banter between them was like just the right kind of banter. It just hit perfectly with me, and it has several tropes that I love. We have the kind of the hate to love dynamic, which I very much enjoy. We have forced proximity. We have an only one bed. Love it. And then we have fake dating, fake exes, but like that's like adjacent, and like fake dating is my favorite trope, so we're counting it. It's kind of an adjacent version. Yeah, I just really loved this book and definitely recommend it if you're into contemporary romance. Next, I read A Sky Beyond the Storm by Sabaa Tahir, which is the 4th and final book in the Ember in the Ashes series. And so, if we're gonna be honest, I did not go into this book with high expectations because, as I mentioned in the previous wrap-up, I really didn't like the 3rd book. This series has 3 point of view characters, and by the time we hit the end of the 3rd book, I really don't care about 2 of them. One of them is one I just had hated from the beginning, and one was when I slowly stopped enjoying their point of view, but I adore the 3rd point of view character so much, so I pretty much just read it for her, because I love Helene, and I was like, here's the thing, I really like Helene, I like her storyline, I want to know how her story ends, so we're going to read the 4th book. And I kind of just assumed, at best, this book would probably be a 3-star, because, I mean, if you only like 1/3 of the point of views, how high you can end up rating it. So maybe it was unfair of me to go in with kind of that preconceived expectation, but here we are. Unfortunately, it was not a 3-star, it was a 2.5. Leia continues to be the worst. I've never liked Leia. And in this one, it feels like she just ascended to a whole another level of Mary Sue character who just, like, is good at things for no reason. Like, she shouldn't just be good at all these things randomly, and she is. And I just don't like her. Not a fan. Elias's point of view is one that I started off liking and slowly stopped liking, just because his point of view and story, as it goes towards the more magical side of this story, I just lost interest because I just wasn't interested in the magical side of this world. Like, that wasn't what hooked me and what I enjoyed in the 1st book. And yeah, his story just continued going in a way I didn't like in this one, and then it got worse for me in this one because he just becomes insufferable in this one. He goes back and forth a lot on this oh, I have feelings. Oh, but I can't have feelings because of this reason. Oh, but I have feelings. But I can't have feelings because of this kind of spoilery reason. I was just like over it. Was so over it. I'm just like, I'm just done with him. And then Helene. Helene remains my queen. I'm glad I finished the series because I'm glad I finished her storyline, but I did not like how her storyline ends, which is why this book did not get those 3 stars, because I did not like the very end of her storyline. I liked it 95% of the way, and the very end, I was mad. I put the book down for like, I had to like put my phone down. I was reading on like my ebook app, and I was like, walk away for a second after something happened. I won't say what, I'm not going to be spoilery here, but pretty mad about it. So, and then overall, just the general story, I am not one who just blanket hates Deus Ex Machina always. I've definitely read books where it's used that I enjoyed, but the way it was used in this one, I really hated. I really hated the way it was used in this one. Not a fan at all. So, anyways, that's the end of this series. Lots of conflicting feelings. It's really weird to have a character, even like your top fantasy favorite characters, and also hate so much of the rest of the series. But here we are. That's where we're at. Next, we had my other 5-star book of the month, and also my favorite book of the month, and that is The Bone Ship's Wake by R.J. Barker. This was my single most anticipated book of the year. It was amazing. I don't really have a lot to say about it because it's the 3rd book, and like anything I could say with specifics is just spoilery, but I sobbed at the end of this book. It was incredible. I adore this series, and I think I'm going to do kind of like a series review / should you read this series video sometime this month. That's my plan, where I'll really just gush about like just kind of details about the series as a whole. But yeah, I freaking love this series so much, and this was an excellent conclusion to it. So good. Next, I read Meet Me in Paradise by Libby Hubscher. Not sure how you say her last name, but let me just start by saying, do not be fooled by this cover. This book was not light, nor fluffy, nor a romance. Like, this was marketed as a romance, but it was not. It was just contemporary fiction with there's like a little dash of romance in there, but it's really not the point of the book. It's really not. And so this book follows our main character, who is supposed to be going on this sister like relax vacation to the islands, and her sister misses the plane, and so she ends up going alone. And so our main character is someone who doesn't get out a lot. She kind of just sticks to her home in Tennessee. So she's kind of like unhinged a little bit by being alone out of the country, and she just wants to go home. But her sister's like, no, you need to stay and enjoy yourself and relax. And so she ends up doing that, and so a lot of this book ends up being about the relationship between the sisters, because the sister has a secret that she's hiding. She has these ulterior motives that maybe she didn't accidentally miss the plane and she did it on purpose, and is pushing her sister to have this like fun vacation for some other reason that she's keeping secret. And I think the author did a really good job developing and like really building this emotional, deep relationship between these sisters that's kind of unhealthy in certain ways. Their mom died when they were young, like a teenager, and the older sister was like 18, and so she kind of took over being the mom for the younger sister, and it ended up kind of developing into this kind of unhealthy codependent relationship. And I think the way she explores this and how it kind of affects the relationship was very good. This book was also very well written. I know this author has another book coming out in 2022 that is being marketed as a romance. We'll see if it is, but I'm definitely interested in trying it out to see if it is actually a romance, because I did like the author's writing style a lot. But beyond that, the story just, I don't know, I just didn't hook me. I definitely was initially pulled in because of what felt like the promise of the romantic storyline, and there wasn't a romantic, it was there, but it was very low-key, and without that romantic storyline really being very present, the sisters themselves never hooked me as characters, and so I never really felt like I fell into feeling big emotions for them, and that's kind of what this book ends up turning into being. It's heartfelt, but if you don't really get hooked onto the characters, the heartfelt just doesn't hit you. And like, I read it and could tell it was heartfelt, and like, I understand why lots of people gave it 5 stars and were like, oh my god, this book hit me, but I was just like, I just wasn't hooked into the characters. The thing that hooked me was the promise of a plotline that never really materialized a lot, and so that didn't happen, and I just wasn't hooked into this other, and it was just kind of a bummer of a story. Like, it was a sad story, and I just like, I don't know, wasn't into that, but definitely interested in trying another book by this author, and maybe that one will be happier. The last book I read this month was Devil in Winter by Lisa Kleypas, which is a historical romance book. And so I've kind of heard that every fan of Lisa Kleypas' favorite male character is either Derek Craven or Sebastian St. Vincent. And so I read Derek Craven's book earlier this summer, and so I thought, for my second Lisa Kleypas book, I should read Sebastian's book, which is this one. And so this book is about Evie, who is trying to get away from her family, who's trying to push her into marriage with this guy she doesn't want to marry, who's like a cousin, because I think that they like want to keep her inheritance in the family because they're assholes. And so she propositions Sebastian St. Vincent to marry her so that she can get out of their thumb, and she knows, due to some events that happened prior to this book that are mentioned in the beginning of this book, that he needs to marry for money. So she's like, I'll marry you, you can get your money, I'll get out from under my family's thumb, we're good. But then she tells him that, however, while they're married, she has no interest in sleeping with him because she doesn't want to be like another notch on his belt loop, essentially, because he's known to be a rake, and she's just like not interested in that. And that comes into play kind of as part of when they're falling for each other. But the beginning of the story, the first steamy scene of the story is fairly early because they get married fairly early in the story, and like she's cool with consummating the marriage. She just doesn't want to do after that. But the way it was written was a little icky to me, and it kind of turned me off. I just didn't like it, and so that definitely turned me off from Sebastian a little bit. Like, he just didn't win me over after that, and then I never really loved Evie either. And so they both did grow on me from the beginning towards the end, but neither of them ended up as favorite characters. And then plot-wise, I did become more interested as the story went on. There was like lots of individual scenes I enjoyed, but it started to lose steam in like the last fourth of the book. And I kind of just was like a book losing steam towards the end, and you have to like kind of make yourself finish it. It just like, I don't know. So I just didn't love it, So I gave this book a 3.5 star. But I did really like the side characters, and I know they both have their own books, so I definitely am interested in picking those up. But this one just wasn't a favorite, and I really thought I was going to love it just because it's so hyped up by historical romance fans. It's like a staple of the genre. And I get why people like it, but I think this one just wasn't the one for me. It wasn't the right characters, it wasn't the right plot to just be a favorite for me. So those are all the books I read in September. If you read any of those, share your thoughts with me on what you thought of them, and I will see you in my next video.